Every British Columbian should be a part of our province's future, because everyone in every community matters. That's why we're reaching out to you. I'm Carole James, and this is Constituency Report.
Hello and welcome to the New Democrat HST special on Shaw TV. For the next 30 minutes, we're going to be speaking with Carole James, New Democrat leader, and we'll be talking about the HST and some of the work that she's been doing. Welcome to the show, Carole.
Thank you. Great to be here.
Now, of course, by now, most people have heard and have been outraged about the deception that they've felt because of the pre-election BC Liberal claim they wouldn't bring in the HST, and then of course they did, and are also outraged because they've felt the burden of the tax shift onto their shoulders. And you've been holding the government to account in the legislature, and I'd like to start off the show by showing a clip. This is Carole James in the legislature on March 31st in question period.
Mr. Speaker, from restaurant meals to haircuts, medical supplements to school supplies, the HST is going to make life more expensive for BC families. A tax that the government promised not to bring in and that comes at the worst possible time. But that's not all. The HST, in fact, is being imposed on families who are also being hit by fee hikes and cost increases starting tomorrow. Tomorrow, British Columbians start paying more for ferry fares, bus fares, BC Hydro, Terracin, camping fees, and in the coming months, the list is only going to grow longer. So my question is to the Minister of Finance. During a time when families are struggling to come out of a recession, during a time when small businesses are working hard just to stay afloat, how can the BC Liberals continue to hit British Columbians with more costs that they can least afford?
Now, we've heard again over and over about the deception and the burden that people will feel. I'd like to ask you about some of the work you've been doing. You've been, since last summer, been traveling, and since the HST was announced, been traveling the province. I'd like to hear about some of the stories that you've heard on the road. And I'd like to do this by showing some of the photos you've brought in. And let's see the first photo. This is from Prince George, I believe.
This is an incredible senior citizen in Prince George who invited me to her home. I have been traveling around British Columbia talking with people in communities who are going to be hurt by this tax. And this wonderful senior citizen is a perfect example of the lack of thought and regard that the government has given to the impact of the HST. She invited me into her house so she could actually show me all of the costs that she had and the concerns that she wasn't going to be able to make ends meet at the end of the month. So she laid out on her table her cable bill, her phone bill. She goes to the hairdresser once every 3 months. She also has a small pet, which for many senior citizens is part of their family, helps keep them in their own home. Veterinarian bills are going to cost. She also takes supplements. She has a lung issue, and to keep herself healthy, she needs to use protein powder to be able to manage month to month. All of those things are now going to have the additional cost of the HST on them. And as she described so well to me, no one talked to her about that. No one told her that this new tax was going to come in after the election. And so she, in fact, has put her name on a wait list for a long-term care home because she doesn't believe she's going to be able to stay in her own home and manage month to month. She said even as it is now, times are really tight. To add an additional cost on to all of those things that matter to her in her life, she's not going to be able to keep going. And what kind of sense does it make to have someone go into a long-term care home, which will cost anyway, instead of keeping themselves in their own home? Doesn't make any kind of sense. Mm-hmm.
Now, the next photo I'd like to cue up. This photo is very different, of course.
This is a big public rally held in Surrey. And it really is an example of the kind of anger that you've seen growing around this province. I think the most interesting thing for me has been the number of people at rallies like this rally in Surrey, where they've come up to me at the rally and said, you know, I've never been at a rally in my entire life, or I've never been involved in any kind of activity like this in my life, or I've never signed a petition before. But I'm just so angry, and it's more, and you raised this at the beginning, it's more than simply an anger at a regressive tax, which this is. Let's remember this is a tax that isn't going to add additional dollars for healthcare or education. Mm-hmm. It basically just shifts the burden from the public, from away from businesses onto the public. And so people are saying they're angry because of the regressive tax. But more than that, they're angry that the government didn't tell the truth, didn't tell them during the election that they were going to bring it in, and turned around and did it. And I think that's why you're seeing people of all political stripes come together. This isn't a partisan issue at all. This is an issue where people who've never been involved in politics, people who are involved in all different political parties, are really joining together to say, this is the worst of old-style politics, where a politician tells us one thing to get our vote and then does just the opposite after the election. People have had enough of that kind of politics, and they really want to have their voice heard. That's what I'm seeing around the province, is a real hunger for people to be heard by politicians, and they're certainly not seeing it right now with this government.
Mm-hmm. Okay, and now I'd like to bring up the next photo, and this photo starts talking about some of the businesses. And I was wondering if you could tell us what we're seeing here.
This is a bike shop that we visited in Kamloops. A wonderful bike shop owner, been in business like many small businesses for a number of years, works incredibly hard. Anyone who's ever been involved in a small business knows that you don't have 8-hour days in a small business. You put in your day, you put in your evening doing your books. And he's done a very successful business. He sells bikes, he does skis and ski equipment. Well, he's now going to have an additional cost, because there used to be an exemption on bicycles and bike helmets and sports equipment. You used to get an exemption from the PST. When the HST comes in, you'll have that additional cost to have to pay on all that equipment. And I think bicycles is an interesting one, because it was in fact the social credit government that gave an exemption to bicycles. So this is an issue that's crossed over political lines, where political parties have recognized how important it is to encourage good behavior, which is getting people to exercise, better for our healthcare system, and do their part for the environment by getting out of their car when they can and riding their bikes. Now they're going to be penalized. And so this bike shop owner was telling us, living in Kamloops, he's really concerned about the lack of competitiveness that he'll be able to provide, being that close to Alberta, where there's no HST and no sales tax. He's worried he's going to lose a lot of customers who will just say, I won't be bothered buying here. We'll just go across the border, we'll buy over there and not pay the tax. So he's worried about the bigger economy in British Columbia, but also the impact on his own business as well.
Mm-hmm. Usually provincial governments are fighting to have a little bit more control over this sort of control of incentives and so on and so forth. Why do you think we're moving the other direction?
Well, it's a really good point, and a number of people have raised the concern about the fact that we're giving away our autonomy in British Columbia. It's pretty rare for a provincial government to say, I want to hand over responsibility to the federal government. But that's really what the BC Liberals are doing. They're giving responsibility over to the federal government and saying, you now control our tax system. We no longer have the ability to decide on exemptions. There's a limit of a 5% cap on the number of exemptions that we can provide in British Columbia. And we lose the chance to use the tax system for good behavior. People have talked about carrots and sticks when it comes to something like the environment. You want to give people the support to change their behavior, and you want to encourage that, and you can use the tax system to do that. We're losing that ability now in British Columbia. We won't be able to say, this is a behavior we want to encourage, we'll give you a tax break on that. We'll be locked into an agreement for 5 years with the federal government, who gets to decide.
Now the next photo we'll cue, this is, I believe, from the legislature.
This was very interesting, and it really shows that this is a campaign. The HST anger is all over British Columbia. This was a group of citizens who traveled all the way down from the Cariboo to present a petition to me to bring into the legislature, because they don't feel they're being listened to by their local MLA. They don't feel they're being listened to by government. So they came down, drove all the way down, from some of them from Williams Lake and areas outside of Williams Lake, to deliver the petition and to thank us for standing up for them, for being a voice for them in the legislature. And so I was pleased to take that petition in, disappointed that their own local MLA wasn't listening to them. But they're going to keep up their pressure, regardless of the distance that they are from Victoria.